Welcome to another episode of Mastering Counseling, where we dive deep into the world of therapy and the business behind it. I'm your host, Becky Copeland. Today, joining us is Erin Greenwell, a limited licensed clinical counselor and a school counselor with a master's in counseling. Erin's unique journey into education and his deep understanding of nonverbal communication have led him to specialize in counseling topics related to children, parenting, and dynamics within households. Erin, we met just about a year ago when you became an intern at my elementary. What a fast year it's been.
Yes, it has.
Yeah. And then he was such a skilled intern that he was able to get his first full-time job several months before the internship ended. So he's been working in the field since I think after New Year's, correct?
Um, yeah, they hired me beginning of January. So,
Yeah. So that
and I
was
have to
really
say you were,
exciting.
yeah, and I have to say you were a great supervisor for internship.
Oh,
So,
thank you. That's very nice. All right. Well, we want to dive into all your knowledge and what you have to share today. So, why don't you first share with us your journey into the counseling field from your experience as an ASD paraeducator to be now becoming a licensed clinical counselor?
yeah, so I feel it kind of started a little bit before that. Really from my childhood. I had a grandfather. My grandfather was a school principal and a camp counselor, and then my grandmother was also a school counselor. And so I feel my journey kind of begins there because they were a big influence on me growing up. And for a long time, I really struggled to understand, what was important to me. And working, I had an undergrad in fine arts. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, but I worked as a substitute teacher for a year. Within a year, I got hired as an ASD paraeducator, and that's kind of where I sat for 8 years. And I feel I learned a lot there. I learned a lot about communication, working with children, and the biggest thing I picked up is that children really trusted me. I worked really well with them. I brought down their anxiety, things of that sort. And even, like I worked directly with ASD children, but because of that, I was around the general education population as well. And I was able to form connections that a lot of the staff found really valuable. And so, in doing that over those 8 years, I kind of realized that counseling was the direction for me. And it kind of lined up with everything, from my grandparents being counselors, and I guess a lot of the things I picked up from there. Yeah, and so I went back to school, and here I am.
That's amazing. I love the personal touch from really long ago, and even with your grandparents having a part in your whole experience. So that's amazing. And then we saw a lot of those great connections when we had you at our school for 6 months. Um, why don't you tell us about some of the challenges and triumphs you encountered while developing your expertise in counseling for children?
Yeah, so I feel to some degree that's still there's still some challenges for me to overcome. Being a new counselor, I'm still kind of learning time management is a big challenge for me right now. In looking a little bit further into the past, I look a lot at my ASD experience. And a lot of the challenges were more in shifting my mindset. I think there's a very, and we'll get into this a little later too, but I think there's a very big um, part of us that wants to approach things with a very disciplinary type of response. But trying to shift my view into being more proactive and having a more positive behavioral spin on things. That's been a really early on when I first started in education. I feel like that was a really big challenge for me.
For sure. There's so many approaches to how we all should be working with children, and it just takes a lot of different things because all the kids are so different. So I agree completely. Um, let's talk about your actual degree in Masters in Counseling, which included both clinical and school counseling. And how would you say the work on that program, and maybe even your fine arts bachelor's degree, how did that encourage or affect your expertise moving into counseling?
Yeah, so to start with the fine arts, I feel that creativity is an important aspect to working with children in education. In a few different ways. There's art therapies, a field that exists. But more broadly, when you're working with children, every child's unique and they come from a unique background. So it's very much not one size fits all. And so often it takes some creative approaches. Like you said, not what works for one child will not work for the next. So I think that requires a lot of creativity. How can we modify what we're using to um, work differently with a student that you know the strategy worked fine for another. So in terms of art and creativity, I think that's kind of where that applies. Um, in the master's program, a lot of the focus for school counseling was on MTSS and the Ask a National model. I feel like I got a lot out of that. That taught me a lot of how to approach children um, on more than just an individual level. Because when we're talking clinical, usually it's individual or small group. Yeah, I feel like I got a lot of knowledge out of that, learning about the ASCA national model and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so many parts of counseling, and school is a lot different than clinical. And I know I was super grateful for your art skills because, as you know, that's a weak point. So he did a great job with kids. You know, I remember the crayon thing. The kids would still talk about some certain way that you would color with crayons. So let's get into some details. What would you say is your best expertise when it comes to child counseling?
Best expertise when it comes to child counseling. Hmm. I'd say it's building connections. I'm really strong in that area, and I feel like that kind of relates to, uh, we'll talk in a little bit. I think I'm going to bring up parenting styles. Uh, I touched a little bit on the positive behavioral approach. Um, you know, I in my childhood, again with my grandparents, there was a lot of anxiety, and learning from them. They were very open, and so I was able to build a connection with them, and I think that's something that I'm able to do with children really well. They may have an anxious moment, or a fight breaks out, or a conflict happens, or a teacher or an adult's angry at them, and I can approach them, and as opposed to getting frustrated myself, I can sit them with, and have like an empathetic moment of, they're crying, and I'll just be there with them and wait till they're ready to talk, and I'll be able to kind of communicate with them in that way. And I think that really helps build a connection, which is really important in the therapeutic process.
Yes, absolutely. In talking about the positive behavior approach, what would you say? Are there any newer trends that you're using or exploring that are kind of shaping the way we address behavioral or cognitive issues with children?
Yeah, there's a few. I think in schools, there's a big push for the PBIS programs, the positive behavioral interventions, and I think that is a really needed and powerful program. As you know, positivity project being one of them. I get to experience implementing that this year, so I'm kind of excited for that. But looking around, there's a lot of programs like that popping up right now, kind of in competition with each other. So I think there's a big focus on that. I like to think that consequence and discipline plays a role, but I think it's often forgotten how important positive uh, behavioral intervention is for children, because that's really where they thrive. Like, I like to see it as consequence lets them know where the boundaries are, but the positive behavioral allows them to grow. So I think there's a lot of room in that area, as well as SEL, the social emotional learning piece. That kind of goes with positive behavioral intervention, I think. Teaching children about what emotions are they experiencing versus what other people are experiencing, and understanding that um, there's a difference between the two. So I think those are two important things in the field that we're focusing on right now.
Yes, thank you. That's great. Um, Shifting a little bit, what are you seeing? Are you seeing a negative impact at all in the world of technology and screen time? Do you feel how do you feel it's affecting children?
Yes, so this is something I'm fairly passionate about. I'm still learning a lot about this topic, but I've done a few projects on this, and I think that technology has a major negative impact on the children's behavioral health and social health. There's been a few studies. Generally, one of the things I saw was for younger children, screen time above an hour um, can start to have effects on the brain similar to addiction. So it triggers a dopamine response, and you start to see the brain look similar to what um, other addicting things would have on the brain. In addition, there's a lot of differences in how we interact with screen time. So there's active versus passive, which would be, are you sitting there watching a show, or are you interacting with the screen? So is it a game, or are the characters on the show interacting with you? And that can have a slight impact. So if it's passive, they're not getting as much out of it, because you have to think that as a child, most of every moment of their day, what they're interacting with is its own lesson. It's its own they're constantly learning. So if instead of playing, interacting, manipulating the environment around them, if they're instead sitting there and just watching something on a screen, that can have a much different impact. So at least if it's like active, where they're engaging with it, at least there's some quality of learning going through that, as opposed to just kind of watching a screen. The other one that was really fascinating to me was individual versus social screen time. So it is the kid in the room by themselves just watching the screen, or are you sitting next to them playing the game with them? And that seems to have a major impact. It's you're learning more social skills if the parents there helping you understand what's happening on the screen.
Great insight on that. Yeah, it's definitely a huge factor. And I think all across the country and world, it's something educators, counselors, we all have to consider. So thank you for the details on that for sure. Um, Kind of going back to a focus with the nonverbal cues of children, how would you help a parent kind of balance between effective communication and understanding the nonverbal cues of their children, or perhaps how the children are perceiving their parents' cues?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think some of it comes down to the parents putting putting more attention on those cues. So for me, with the background in ASD, I worked with a lot of nonverbal populations. So for me, I had to recognize the nonverbal communication, right? Because that's the only way they had to communicate. In doing so, I feel that really helped me pay attention to it more. So I think that can be a challenge for people who aren't paying as close attention to it. So in that sense, I would say I just try to keep it in mind, like just try and pay attention to it. I think it can start early. I think I think it just comes naturally. It's just maybe something that we don't actively think about, because when you have a kid, they're not verbal until a few years down the road. So up until that point, you are communicating with them non-verbally. So I guess for people who haven't had children yet, just pay attention to that. Pay attention to all the communication that happens with your child before they're able to use their words, because that's going to carry on into the future.
Thank you. Awesome. Let's go into talking about connection, movement, and ritual. And how would you say your involvement in various communities, how have these influenced your counseling approach?
Yeah, so there's a few different communities I've been a part of. Um, yeah, I feel like for all of us as human beings, whatever communities we're part of, um, kind of gets pulled into our character and then put through in our work. One of the big communities I'm
Can
a
you
part
just
of.
repeat that one last part? I didn't catch it. You said something about different communities impact us. Whatever the last word is, I
Yeah,
couldn't hear.
yeah. Let's see if I can remember it. 'Cause it sounded really, really good. Um, the communities we're part of impact the way that impact our values and the ways that we act, and that in turn gets put into the work that we do. I think that sounds about right.
I got it. I missed the values and the work word. So perfect. Okay, keep
Gotcha.
going. Sorry.
No problem. So I've been part of a few different communities. I know a lot of performers. I'm a martial artist, so I'm part of a martial art community that's very traditional. Um, One of the communities I'm a part of is the uh, local burner community, or the people that go to art events like Burning Man and stuff like that. Um, all of those have a lot of movement involved, and all of them have their own kind of set of rituals. So I've kind of pulled a lot of that into what I do as a counselor. So for example, working with a student, for me, a big thing at the age group I work, um, I I think a lot of times it's a struggle to understand why like a kid will do something over and over and over, even though you've told them verbally that, oh no, you're not supposed to do this. Why do you keep doing this? It's a bad thing to do, and like you give them this big talk, but where's the practice in it? Where's the movement? So in that sense, like I've something I did recently with a student, they're acting up in class and they're maybe um, getting angry and going after another kid. So in bringing them into my room, we talk about it a little bit, but then I'm like, okay, so let's practice this. And I tell them, okay, so we're having a conversation, we're saying something, and then I say something really mean to you, and I act it out. It's part of, we play it out, and so we do that through scenarios. And I think that's really important. Is that it's in motion, it's movement, it's part of play, right? Because I think that's where a lot of their education comes from at that age. So and I think that carries through to us as adults. I personally think that's something that we kind of forget and lose sometimes. And so that's where I really value some of the communities I'm a part of, like the performers. I've started to bring some juggling stuff to work, things of that sort, and the kids really love it. But it's also its own teaching tool, right? Because you start juggling and they're like, here, you do it, and they're like, I can't, and I'm like, well, that's because you've never done it before. And I'll tell them like, you're gonna fail, you're gonna fail, you're gonna fail, you're gonna fail a million times, and then eventually you'll get it the right way. And it's teaching that idea that you need to practice things, right? And it's, I don't know, I feel like that's a hard concept sometimes. Like you see a lot of kids in math, and they just get discouraged. Why am I practicing this a million times? Well, because you got to do it a million times to get good at it. But at the same time, where in their life are they practicing something that they actually enjoy practicing over and over and over and over? And so I think it's important to instill that so they understand its value. You get that. I think that's also why it's often important to have a lot of extracurriculars. For me, that would be the martial arts, and same thing. Um, we don't get better and learn things by just doing it once and doing a cool move. No, we got to practice, 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 practice. So,
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Especially, it's hard for kids to fail. So, doing that, trying new things is very important. And in the long run, so good for them. So, thanks.
mhm, mhm.
Let's kind of talk about what are some of the resources and tools that have been instrumental in your counseling approach and philosophy, as far as maybe books, authors,
Mhm.
or even some of the things you already mentioned.
Yeah. So, a big one for me is extracurriculars. That's going to vary area to area. I'm partial to martial arts because that's something dear to me. But even finding sports clubs and extra activities that children can do outside of school for parents. I met um, there was a family I met. I think they were Albanian, and they were really struggling because their kid, when they came over, they loved soccer. But she was really struggling to find a league that played soccer, and you could see the kid was struggling a little bit mentally because of that. So I kind of helped find those resources for the parents, and that really helped him. So finding extracurriculars I think helps. Um, Other things. So two big authors or people that I've been listening to right now. One is names. Names are a weak point, especially on the spot. I forget names. Like really good.
You mentioned something
Jonathan
about
Haidt.
Lauren. Lauren, someone?
Laura.
Laura.
Oh, Laura Beauregard. She's working here in the district. She's a
Okay.
teacher consultant, but she was giving a good talk today on visuals, the importance of visuals in the classroom.
Mhm.
Um, Jonathan Haidt is someone I've listened to, and he's someone who talks a lot about um, the effects of technology on children. He also talks about the importance of movement and play. So, an extension of um, the issues with screen time is we've lost a lot of outdoor play time, and where children used to go outside and play at the age of 7 and 8, free roaming without an adult around, we've lost that completely. Some areas still allow it, but in a lot of places, if your kid goes out, people might um, call the police or something like that, just because the culture shifted. And so he talks a lot about that and the effects that has on children. So he's a big author I like that I've been reading a lot on. And then the other author, John Vervaeke, that's his name. He has a series called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. It is it is like, I want to say it's like its own program at a college. Like each video is like an hour long. There's 50 plus videos. And he's in a classroom with like a board and he's writing all over it and stuff like that. But it's a nice walk through history, talking about philosophy and also exploring the concept of meaning. And I have learned so much from that, including the importance of practice and ritual and movement and things of that sort. So it all kind of connects to a lot of the other things I've been talking about. But it's really nice because it's kind of there's a lot of really little historic pieces that he talks about. Um, Good example, like a lot of times we in the counseling field we talk about mindfulness, and I think a lot of us have this idea that mindfulness is being is being present. Um, but he breaks it down in a really interesting way, and he talks about where its roots, and mindfulness comes from Eastern philosophy and things like Buddhism. And in the way that they approached it, a lot of times it gives this nice example that I loved, where he's like, okay, so we're going to practice mindfulness and we're going to focus on this. Can't really see it, but this pen, right? And he's like, okay, so how do we do that? Okay, focus on the pen, focus on the pen. No, why aren't you paying attention? Your attention wandered. Why aren't you paying attention to the pen? Pay attention to the pen. Pay attention to the pen. Well, that's a really hard thing to do. So what do you do instead? Well, you're not just paying attention to the pen, you're noticing all the little pieces of it. You're noticing the color. Well, it's a kind of a gold pen, and it's got these numbers on it. And paying attention to those details more so than just saying pay attention to something keeps your attention there. So I don't know, that's a little small
Great
piece,
little
but
object lesson. It did appear
yeah.
on our side at some point. No, that's great. I think probably our last question, all of this has been really good, but what would be your advice for aspiring counselors who are interested in going into child counseling or school counseling, as they embark on this rewarding path?
um I would say probably the best piece of advice I can give is keep an open mind, be flexible, understand that you're going to run into a lot of unique situations and that every kid's a little different. And as long as you have a big heart and you have a lot of passion, and you're able to connect with the children, I think you'll do a pretty good job.
All right, I agree completely with that for sure. Um, Anything else you wanted to mention that you didn't get to talk about before we close out for the day?
Um, I think I think we mentioned ritual before this a little bit, and I was doing some thinking earlier in one of the meetings I was in, because they brought up someone brought up routine, and I see routine and ritual as kind of similar concepts. Ritual is something I'm still trying to wrap my head around and learn about, and I see it as something important. But it's a little hard for me to understand the definition of it. It's a really broad term. But ritual does have an importance in our life, and I think that can be seen somewhat through routine, because routine is similar to the ritual. It's something that we do on a regular basis, and I think that can be really important for children too. Having a routine in the morning, I brush my teeth, I get my clothes on, I do this, and so everything's kind of in order, and they know what they're doing. And when that's in place, um, all that kind of gives the border or the boundaries around what they need to do in the day, and everything else can be filled with play, learning, and fun.
So, Erin, thanks so much for giving your time today, especially with 1 week left of summer vacation. We really appreciate you sharing your insights and especially your expertise in nonverbal communication and with all the different types of kids that you've worked with. That's been awesome. And I know soon we will be talking and collaborating. So the conversation will continue. We've delved into some great topics in the counseling world. And to our listeners, thank you for subscribing. We look forward to your feedback and continued conversation in the future. Stay tuned for our next episode, which promises great insight into the exciting work of counseling and therapy. I'm going to sign off of Mastering Counseling for today. I look forward to connecting again. Have a beautiful day and keep the buzz going for Mastering Counseling.